Hey, are you a doctoral student who's just starting your program, or are you getting close to writing your dissertation and your doctoral program offers you the option of writing either a 5 chapter dissertation or a 3 article based dissertation and you're not sure which one and which choice to make? If so, I want you to keep watching this video because on today's episode of Done Dissertation Pro Tip, in less than 10 minutes, I'm going to share with you the pros and cons of going either the article based dissertation route or the chapter based dissertation route. And make sure that you stick tuned to the end of the video because I'm going to share with you actually what I would do if I was in this situation having to think through the process of whether I would do an article-based or a chapter-based dissertation. And if you're just watching this and you don't know who I am, my name is Dr. Ramon Goings, founder at Done Dissertation, where our goal is to demystify the dissertation process so that you, the doctoral student, can write and defend your dissertation in 1 year or less. With that said, in today's episode, we're going to explore the question, should I write either a 5 chapter or a 3 article based dissertation? So, first things first, I think it's important that when we are considering where we want to go with this, we first need to talk about the 5 chapter dissertation pros and cons. Now, when we look at the pros and cons of the 5 chapter dissertation, first things first, I want us to get some language defined. And what that is around what is the typical format for a chapter based dissertation. So this can vastly differ. So I know folks are in various types of doctoral programs, but I'm going to give you typically what you would see in a chapter based dissertation, where you'd have one chapter as an intro, another one as a lit review, and chapter 3 is your methodology. That's usually considered a dissertation proposal. And then after you collect your data, you would write up chapter 4, which is your findings for your study, and chapter 5 is a discussion, bringing it all together. Now that we have that kind of common language, you know what I'm talking about when I'm referring to the 5 chapter dissertation format, let's talk about some of the pros and cons. So when we're thinking about the pros, a couple of things we want to consider is looking at the structure and cohesiveness of a 5 chapter dissertation. It's something said to be and be able to write a dissertation that you can easily, structure. What goes in the introduction, kind of gives you a roadmap. You know that you're gonna have a literature review. You know you're gonna have a methodology chapter, and then findings, conclusion. So you're able to see, and there's definitely a structure and a cohesiveness to the whole thing because it's just one solid project. You're able to kind of have it stretch out. A second pro that I want you to consider is that for most programs, the 5 chapter dissertation is going to be most familiar to faculty. And I would say the article base is somewhat newer in certain disciplines. And so you'll see, a lot of programs adopting this. But I would say for the chapter based version, this is most common. And a lot of times, depending how old your faculty member was when they got their doctorate, they probably had more of a 5 chapter based dissertation, most likely at this point. And then what I like about the 5 chapter dissertation, some of the pros around it is that you have space to actually expand your ideas. Because when we go to start writing an article based format, depending on how it's structured for you, you may not have the space to expand like you would in an actual dissertation. So this is helpful when you're trying to articulate more about some of the arguments you're making and you don't feel like you have a page requirement that's like looming over your head. So those are some of the pros that we want to consider with the 5 chapter dissertation. However, with pros, there definitely are some cons of the 5 chapter version, and I want you to consider these as well. And so, with that, some of the cons is that you actually have to go about restructuring after you have finished the dissertation, especially if you want to write for publication. So this becomes really important because I know a lot of you all have gone and started writing your dissertations because you want to publish from them later. One of the cons of doing the chapter-based version of a dissertation is that there's going to need to be some restructuring. For instance, like your literature review that you want to publish it in a journal, you're probably in a dissertation literature review for a 5 chapter. There's sometimes between the page limits of like 25 pages to upwards of 60 pages. So you're going to have to condense it dramatically. So that's something to consider there. Another con is that there's more upfront writing during the proposal phase when you have a chapter-based dissertation. So typically in most programs, you're going to write an intro, literature review, and method chapters before you defend and actually go collect your data. So there's a lot of upfront work that you have to do in order to move the project along. So again, that's just something to consider if you're thinking about your time frame. And then one of the other cons about the chapter approach is that there's just less flexibility. It's usually very templated and it's kind of a certain cadence approach of writing to each of the chapters. So because of that, you just have to consider, does that particular style work for you and what you want out of the experience. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a matter of making sure you are clear about what you want and how you want to approach writing the actual dissertation. So now that we kind of looked at the pros and cons of the chapter-based, let's look at the pros and cons of the article-based dissertation, because I think there are some pros and cons to that as well. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to share and think through this through a 3 article format. There are a number of different norms in disciplines, and I know if you're watching, you might be in a various discipline. And so we've worked at done dissertation with people in the hard sciences, to, in engineering. A lot of STEM disciplines have one way approach to us. Some folks in more of the social sciences have a different approach. And so you just have to be mindful about what the format is. But for the purpose of this video, our format is thinking about one chapter is going to be an overview of the whole project. Then you're going to have 3 individual papers. And then lastly, a discussion chapter to tie it all together. So it ends up being somewhat similar to the 5 chapter, but just the actual content will be journal articles versus just traditional based chapters. So with that said, let's look at some of the pros of the article-based dissertation format. I would say some of the pros is that for this type of project, it actually is, and it lends itself to being publication ready work. And I put ready-ish because there's still going to be some formatting and things that you may have to adhere to in order to submit for a journal. But for the most part, you have it in the structure that journals want, right? Intro, literature review, methods for each paper. That's typically what you're going to write when you're writing for publication. So it makes sense. The second aspect in terms of pros is that it allows you to have a laser focus on your research area because you're able to design and develop studies that are very specific. So I think for someone who is very clear about what they're doing, this approach could be very beneficial because you know exactly where you're going. And then the third pro to consider is that there are some advantages from an article-based dissertation for your career, especially if you're trying to go to the faculty route. Because as faculty, one of the ways that you're evaluated is through your ability to publish. It's great when you can go into a faculty position with your dissertation in hand and already have 3 basically well-designed articles that have already been reviewed really well by your committee that you can go ahead as soon as you enter your faculty position, start submitting those for publication. So essentially, maybe within the first year, year and a half, depending on how long the publishing process takes, you could have 3 articles published without having to go collect any new data. That is definitely a pro if you're able to work in this particular style. But now with this, there are some cons that I want you all to consider as well with the article-based dissertation format. One is that sometimes I've heard students from our program who have done this had there's a lack of cohesiveness between all of what they're working on. And so it can feel like the papers are very disjointed or there's no through line between papers 1, 2, and 3. This sense you're going to have to really work hard at making sure they're there. But that is a con of this type of work. The second piece in terms of a con for this type of project is that you have to make sure that if you're trying to submit and if the requirement of your program is to actually submit it to a journal and for it to be accepted, that takes a lot of time. So just remember that the publication process from the day you submit, I always say takes at least a year if everything goes smoothly for it to come out. If acceptance is a requirement, that may be something to really consider before you make that decision. But if submission is the requirement, then that's something that you more so you can work with. And then lastly, one of the cons of this approach is that there is a committee review complexity. And so what I mean by that, committees, when they're thinking about journal articles, may view it through a very different light than they do a dissertation because they put their publishing hat on and really try to critique it. So sometimes you can get your work can be more evaluated harshly than you would if you were just normally submitting a article or a chapter for a dissertation. The articles kind of go to a next level because there's going to be this peer review that happens once you finish. Now, if you had to ask me what I would do, it depends. If I was someone in the case where I really knew my literature area and I had thought through that I could have 3 papers that were interconnected, then I probably would have gone the article route for my dissertation. My program didn't offer that, so we did a traditional 5-chapter approach. But if you're someone who is figuring out one that you don't want to write for publication after you get out of, the university setting, I would say go to the chapter-based dissertation. For me, because what I wanted to do as faculty, it would have been nice to have had 3 kind of ready put together articles that I could have submitted immediately for publication, which for me, after I wrote my dissertation, I had to then massage some of the content in order to create journal articles from that. While I was successful, it would have been very nice to have had that. So with that in mind, just keep these things in consideration if you are trying to think about whether you should go the article-based route or the chapter-based route. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just what works best for you. And with that said, if you are a doctoral student and you find that you're trying to get through your dissertation process and not getting the support and help that you need, and you need a proven system and support, I would invite you to work with us in our Velocity coaching program. It is a coaching experience designed to help you fast track your dissertation process. And so if you're interested in learning more about what we do at Done Dissertation, I would invite you to visit www.velocitydissertation.com, or you can scan the QR code that is here on your screen. Again, please share this video with someone who is contemplating whether they're going to go with the chapter-based or article-based dissertation. And if there are further questions that you might have about various topics related to the doctoral student experience, please feel free to submit those to us wherever you follow us on social media, so that we will incorporate these into future Done Dissertation pro tip videos. And with that said, my name is Dr. Ramon Goings, founder of Done Dissertation. Until next time, I wish you a Done Dissertation. Take care.